Hello everyone, my name is Dusk and welcome to another episode of Shokz Video Guide. In this guide we're going to watch Shokz play against EGIdRA. EGIdRA is one of the best North American Zerg players and one of the best Zerg players in the world as a whole. He was previously on the GSL Code S and I think he quit just because he wanted to move back to America. But anyway, I'm going to watch Shokz play EGIdRA. The map is Antiga Shipyard, and on this map, there's some really weird interplay that happens between Terran versus Zerg. First of all, as you can see, there's some asymmetrical imbalance, which means that the Terran's third is basically really close to the Zerg's main, and that makes it really hard for Zerg to defend against mid and early game Terran attacks. However, once the Zerg player gets to the late game, there becomes a much needed shift in the Zerg versus Terran paradigm, in which the Zerg player gets an upper hand because the Terran player has a really hard time countering Broodlords since the Ghost nerf in damage. And so we're going to watch how that plays out and how Shokz may or may not take advantage of this during the course of his play. So he's going to start out with the most respectful Terran versus Zerg opener. And by respectful, I just mean that he is going to go for the 3 orbital command. And some of you may be like, oh, hey, what does this respect mean? Well, basically, if you try to cheese your opponent, you're basically saying, I'm not as good as you, or I want a quick game, or you're not as good as me. I want to end this game quickly. When you're going for a macro game, you're saying I respect you as an opponent, and I want to drag this game out as much as possible to see who truly is the best player. And so the triple orbital command build, you guys haven't watched the previous videos, is going to be fairly straightforward. You're going to start with a Hellion expand, and then instead of getting you just delay your second gas basically a little bit, so yeah, you get a 3rd orbital command. And this is the build that Shokz does every single game against Zerg, just because it's the most solid way to play, and it helps you get better because it gets you into the late game. Now, that being said, Terran really isn't that good against Zerg on really close position late game, but still, it's just a solid way to play. And especially on the maps such as Antiga Shipyard, you have your really close and nested third, so it makes it really popular to do the triple orbital command build, as basically all you would have to do is settle down into this middle area with a few bunkers, supply depots, and siege shanks, and you'll be fine and dandy against every kind of Zerg harassment that they can put out until Broodlords do come out into play. And so we're going to start with the 10 supply depot, 12 racks, 13 gas, and then you're going to build 2 marines. Wait, actually, I think Shokz is going for the command center first, never mind. And so he's going to be building his factory right after he gets enough minerals. He already has the 100 gas, and so this is a little bit more greedy. Most players like to get their factory first and then the command center, but I guess Shokz knows EGIdRA a little bit more, and so he knows EGIdRA is very unlikely to cheese, and so he is going for the little slightly greedier command center before factory, but overall it really doesn't do that much of a difference. Now we're going to see Shokz place down a bunker. This is basically essential just so that EGIdRA doesn't run in with a bunch of speedlings and end the game immediately. After your first 100 gas is going to be going towards the factory. After that, you're going to be making a reactor. And then after the reactor and factory is done, you can obviously swap. And just a quick tip, if you guys start your reactor at around 400 health of the factory, you can still swap it in time. So as you can see, he's going to lift up the factory first, place it directly over the reactor. Well, Shokz isn't doing it this game, but something that he could do to improve his timings is basically lift up the factory when it's done first, and then position it over the barracks right as the reactor is done. He would obviously land the factory and produce his 2 Hellions. And as you can see, Shokz actually, because he only had 1 marine in the bunker, he actually had to take the marine out and kite the Zergling just a little bit, just to make sure that the Zergling doesn't get a full scout in. Although it's pretty obvious to EGIdRA what Shokz is doing, is this is going to be probably a Hellion expand. And so as you can see, Shokz is getting his 3rd command center before 2nd gas. He's also starting a starport, and the starport is kind of peculiar. We don't generally see very quick starport timings against Zerg, and this is just one of those things that you kind of have to do at the higher levels of play to catch your opponent off guard. Everyone knows what the standard builds are, and so in order to get ahead in these kinds of games, you basically want to do something unique that is going to be slightly risky. It's not going to be all in, but it's going to be slightly risky, and if it pays off, you're going to do really well, and if it doesn't, then so be it. And so with the starport, you're going to be going for a fast Banshees, and as you can see, the tech lab is being made by the barracks right here. You really don't need to start your stim and combat shield research anytime soon, just because you're going to be starting both on one barracks, and so you're trying to aim for the 11 to 13 minute push. As you can see, Shokz is only on one gas, so he's not committing to any kind of cloaked play from Banshee, as obviously you can't support it, and he's just going to be making one Banshee and swapping it right from there. Also, as you can see, Shokz has 4 Hellions. A 5th one is on the way, and these Hellions are basically just to prevent creep spread. And so he's placing them at the bottom of the ramp, and you might say, well, why isn't he placing at the top? You know, you want to maximize the amount of area that Zerg cannot take. And I believe the reason is just because when you go up the ramp, you have this massive concave, and it makes it really easy for Zerglings to run. But when you're at the bottom, all the Zerglings have to go through a smaller choke, and this is one of the main mistakes that Shokz actually made right there. When you're doing this kind of Hellion camping outside of the Zerg's base, it's super crucial to be constantly panning to them. And by what I mean is, you know, you're going back to your base, you're gonna macro, and then you're gonna basically put all the stuff on 1 or 2. As you can see, Shokz's Banshee on 1, but you should always put the stuff on 1 or 2. And it's just going to make it really easy for you to keep track of your Hellions and not lose everything like that. Now, granted, Shokz was microing this Banshee. It does have 2 kills, so that may have been a factor in him losing the Hellions, but I feel like losing the Hellions is much more important than getting a few kills on your Banshee. Now, what losing those Hellions basically did for EGIdRA is that he gets complete Zerg control, complete map control. He can spread creep wherever he pleases, and he gets the Zelnaga tower, and basically he gets map control of the entire map all the way up to the Zerg's or the Terran base to right about here. Now, with this Banshee, however, the Terran player is able to prevent the Zerg's 3rd, which is extremely important. So as you can see at the income, the Terran's base is slightly ahead because of the mules, and he also has his 3rd command center up, while EGIdRA does not yet have his have his hatchery even started into an orbital. And very nice play from Shokz, sniping that drone just before it can turn into a hatchery. And if it can turn into a hatchery, obviously the Banshee would be shooed away by the Queen, and the 3rd would be allowed to go up. But right now he just delayed it by about 10 to 20 seconds, and that's pretty significant in getting a 3rd, especially when the Terran player is already having his own 3rd up. And as you can see, Shokz is not deciding to push on the low ground. This is a smart move, just because when you push on the low ground, you change the surface area you have to defend from this much to this much, and it becomes a much easier for the Zerg player to attack you, especially with this back area here. And so when the time that you want to move into your 3rd is basically at around 60 workers, and that's when you can fully utilize having the additional mineral patches. Otherwise, you know, keeping your orbital in your main base is great, because if they do decide to take if they do decide to all in you and you're not hyperextended as you are right here, then you've basically won the game because you have a 3rd command center. Now, EGIdRA obviously not known for his all-inning, but as you can see at this point, because of that small Banshee, usage, he's slightly ahead now in workers. He's actually significantly ahead, and he has his 3rd up, while EGIdRA does not yet have his completed. Now, he is bringing this Banshee back for a little bit more harassment, and this can be used to keep kill the Zerglings, you know, at the Zelnaga tower in front of Shokz's base, and just any kind of creep tumors that are possibly spreading along the way. As you can see, one Banshee is very annoying for the Zerg player, but multiple Banshees are not that good. And because the metagame shifted from EGIdRA, or from Zerg players going for Mutiling into Ling Infestor, it's a lot more viable for Shokz to do this kind of Banshee play. Now, if EGIdRA did decide to go Mutilist, this Banshee would basically be completely useless, especially without Cloak. And Shokz actually made a pretty big mistake of losing it right there. As you can see, some preemptive turrets. These turrets double as both Mutilist deterrence and detection for against infestors. EGIdRA usually doesn't go roaches against Terran, so it's just mainly detection against infestors. As you can see, the turret placement is right here. It's not in the middle of the base, and we have it right here just because Shokz doesn't want his refinery harassed. If you put it in the middle, your refinery is going to get harassed, and it's also not in the middle of your mineral line, just because the bouncing will actually kill workers. And you might say, oh, well, what if I want to compare or repair these missile turrets? Well, the thing is that it's much better to zone with your turrets than to actually allow them to be repaired, because while they're being repaired, you're going to be constantly losing workers, and once a Zerg player gets enough Mutilists, it doesn't really matter how much you repair it, just because you can't get enough surface area around it. And so putting it out here, basically the Zerg Mutalisks are going to come in, they're going to try to kill this missile turret, and it gives time for Shokz to bring his Marines in. If you put it just in the middle, the Zerg's going to kill workers regardless, and so it's always better just to lose missile turrets than workers, obviously. So you can see really nice turret placement, or siege tank placement by Shokz, and this is going to be around the time when his combat shield is going to be finished. As you can see, combat shield is about to finish, and so he's moving out for a push. And as you can see from the Zerg player, he's got a lot of infestors and a lot of well upgraded Zerglings. I believe they're at 1-2 right now, and as you can see, the Zerg player actually prioritized getting his armor first, and that's just because if you have 1 point in the Zerg carapace, your siege tanks no longer one-shot Zerglings, which is extremely important. Very nice play from EGIdrA right now, and this is one of the mistakes that Shokz has made. He did not scan forward, and it's extremely important to scan forward just because you're going to be able to scan out any of the burrowed banelings that the Zerg player may or may not have, and also the infestor play that Shokz, or that EGIdrA just did right here. And as you can see, Shokz dropped into the main, but I believe that this was a mistake. EGIdrA, knowing these map positions are possibly bad, he just preemptively made these spines and spore crawlers in the main, knowing that Shokz would do some kind of drop like that. And spines and spores are really good against Marines compared to their costs, compared to Zerglings, just because, you know, siege tanks won't be able to splash on multiple spines and spores, and a spine is basically 150 minerals, so that's 6 slings, and I believe 6 slings are not going to be able to kill as much as a single spine crawler, especially if you're if the Terran player is only dropping small amounts of lings at a time. As you can see, the Zerg player, in this case EGIdrA, actually teched up really fast. He's going for that infestor ling style, which allows you to tech extremely fast just because you're not using any gas on Mutalisks. You're using your gas on infestors, which are basically good all game. Mutalisks kind of drop off near the end of the game, but infestors are good all game, and also the infestation pit is a prerequisite for the Broodlord technology, and so that basically allows him to tech up really fast and get these Broodlords out by 6 minutes, 16 minutes, and so this is the time that it's not like the Terran has lost, but he's got very limited options to combat these. He needs a lot of previously, before the Ghosts got nerfed, this entire composition would be copied by pure Ghosts, as Ghosts obviously destroy Lings, even though Marines are better cost effective. They destroy Infestors and they destroy Broodlords with their snipe, but now because of the massive Ghost nerf, they're really, really useless, and Broodlords are kind of considered a hard counter to siege tanks because they can't go into siege mode. And so the ideal composition for what a Terran player would do at this point is basically he would go and attack as much of the Zerg's, you know, outer expansions as possible, the 3rd, the 4th, and any kind of other expansions, and then he would go for a Viking, Thor, Marine style. And Thors are really not that bad against Broodlords, ironically, even though Thors don't do bonus damage. They're just there to basically take damage and do, you know, mediocre amounts of damage. They're also not very susceptible to fungal like Marines are. And so what basically is going to happen is your Marines are going to shoot at the Broodlings, and your Marines are going to sometimes shoot at the Zerglings, and your Marines are going to sometimes shoot at the Infestors or Broodlords, depending on the range. But your main damage output is going to come from your Thors and Vikings. And so that is kind of a weird composition to go against Ling, Infestor, Broodlord, but it's the best option that Terrans have currently. As you can see, Shokz is just primarily focusing on getting out these Vikings, getting out these Thors, and he's just he doesn't have time to actually get reactors. This is very important. If you're going to plan to go into Viking production and you need them immediately, don't get reactors, just because getting a reactor takes about the same time as getting a starport. And so what he's doing right now is very nice. He's trying to get rid of his siege tanks, and I don't mean like he's trying to throw away them purposely. What I basically mean is that he's trying to trade them cost effectively against a Zerg player, and this is just because Thors or siege tanks are completely useless against Broodlords. They make your army actually worse than Broodlords, and if your army is if you're fighting a pure Broodlord, Infestor, Ling army, it's actually better just to not have your siege tanks sieged up. And so as you can see, Shokz is just moving his army as further away from his main base as possible. He's trying to take exterior expansions, but obviously this one's not going to go up. And he's just trying to counterattack as much as possible with his Marine tank army. Now this attack is good, but as you can see, this attack is definitely going to die. And although this attack is on the complete opposite side of EGIdRA's base, it's going to die and then Shokz's bases is going to be completely wide open. Now what I would like to have seen is that Shokz go for this base instead. If he did decide to go for this base, the third wouldn't matter so much as Idra's already been mining from the third. Now granted, the third does have still significant amounts of minerals, but 2,500 for these normal patches, or 1,500 is a lot more than these 800 mineral patches that these have at Idra's third. Now, one of the things that I did like from Shokz is that basically he saw that the enemy went Infestor, Corruptor, Zergling, and so what he did was just send in one Viking at a time. Now, one Viking at a time is going to be extremely annoying for the Zerg player because he's going to have to use multiple fungals and possibly an Infested Terran or two just to kill the single Viking, and so that basically helps Shokz whittle down the infestor energy. Now, granted, this isn't a really good way to kill the army as a whole, but it's just something that you guys should keep in mind if you do have excessive amounts of Vikings. Just send in your Vikings at a time. Make sure they're not clumped, obviously, for the fungal growth, and just try to attack. Now at this point, Shokz's counterattacks have not yet worked. He has not been able to kill this fourth expansion, which is pretty crucial, and so he's just going to be continually going for a counterattack. These siege tanks at this point are really not that useful, and he's only got 3 starports without reactive producing Vikings. So one of the only options he's got left is to go for a counterattack, but as you can see, these two medevacs going to the main of Shokz, main of Idra, should probably be paying attention a little bit more, but he dropped directly into Spore Crawlers and Spine Crawlers, and so they're basically dead. And then this medevac, you know, better multitasking from Idra, was able to pick that off fairly easy. And so at this point, it's basically over. I'm going to fast forward it to the end. And Shokz just is without resources. His fourth was denied, and he was not able to destroy the fourth of Idra's, which basically allowed Idra to just continually pressure on and trade a little bit more cost effectively than Shokz. And so I just want to go over some crucial points of this game. First of all, during the mid game of Shokz, he did something very nice, and because the metagame shifted from going mutaless, Terrans can now open a little bit better with Banshees, and so that single Banshee, don't get cloaked, 1 gas, single Banshee, that's able to deny creep tumors, that's able to deny the third if you snipe the drone. It doesn't even matter if the queen's there, you just snipe the drone, and the third's basically denied. Now, one of the mistakes that Shokz did was not pay attention to his Hellions very well. With that, he could even kill that queen that was trying to protect it, and it makes it extremely annoying for the Zerg player to try to secure that third. So if he didn't lose those Hellions, retain, you know, Ling map control, then he would have basically denied the third even further. And at some point, if you guys noticed that Shokz's third was up before Idra's third was even started, this is pretty crucial. And so this gave Shokz kind of a mid-game advantage. Now, one of the mistakes that Shokz did was that he attacked, and he just didn't attack quick enough. His attack started at around 14 minutes, but at 16:30, Idra already had Broodlords. Now, because Idra knows on these these asymmetrical maps, it's going to be very close, and so he might have rushed towards them. But because they're so close, he should have just attacked sooner. And if he did attack sooner before the Broodlords came on, instead of just slow pushing, he should have just scanned it and saw, okay, there's no burrowed banelings, we can just move straight into attack. He may have done better. Now, I don't want to say that rushing an attack, you know, getting out of position siege mode is going to be better, but in this case, it may have worked out. Now, one of the bad things about this map is because of the close positions that Shokz got, the Broodlord switch was just too brutal on Shokz, and he wasn't able to trade cost effectively before he could get out an army that could correctly counter Broodlords, and so that's why he lost. Now, my name is Dusk. If you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to leave in the section below, but otherwise I will